I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording and get us started for today. So hello, everybody. My name is Sid Betancourt, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the coalition. And firstly, I'd love to wish everyone a happy Fair Housing Month. I'm excited to facilitate this conversation and have you all joining this Tenant Talk Live conversation on coalition building around housing justice. I'll begin by providing some NLIHC updates, including legislative and ER8 updates, and then I'll introduce our guests from the Just Cities Institute in California and the Washington State Housing Justice Coalition, who will discuss their coalition building around fair chance housing laws. So before I get started, I just want to cover a few logistics. As you might have just noticed, I just started recording, so we will be uploading this webinar to YouTube later this week. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A feature down in the bar at the bottom of your screen. And you can feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts as well. I will be sending a follow-up email later in the week or possibly early next week that'll share the recording, the chat, and other resources. And also, I'll invite folks to hop into the conversation a little bit later into the call if we have time. So if you'd like to share some of your thoughts, just know that we are recording this session again. And yeah, so again, before I introduce our panelists for the evening, I just want to provide a few NLIHC updates. The first one being our policy update. So last Monday, actually, President Biden released his budget request for the fiscal year 2023, kickstarting the FY 2023 appropriation season. So the budget would fund HUD programs at $71.9 billion, and that's approximately $6.2 billion more than the last year's level, and that would provide substantial federal investments in affordable homes while also increasing the availability of housing assistance to families with the greatest needs. The budget request proposes significantly increased access to housing choice vouchers by calling for $32.1 billion to renew all existing housing vouchers and to expand assistance to an additional 200,000 households. And if enacted, this would be kind of like the biggest expansions of housing vouchers that we've seen in the program's history. So that's super exciting. And the president's budget also proposes significant investments to address homelessness and preserve and increase the supply of affordable housing with an increase to HUD's homeless assistance grants program and a $35 billion in mandatory funding for the new housing supply fund, which would support housing and renters, housing for renters and home buyers with low to moderate incomes. And NLIHC did provide a full analysis on the budget that you can read more about, and Courtney will be dropping that link in the chat. And as I kind of alluded to, the Senate is already and Senate leaders in the appropriation committees are already kind of talking to discuss like what their priorities are going to be for the FY23 season. And this opportunity, or this bill kind of provides advocates with the opportunity to make sure that we make significant investments in affordable housing and community development block development programs, including NLIHC's top priorities for FY23. So we want to make sure that at least $32.13 billion for tenant-based rental assistance is made available to renew all existing contracts and expand housing choice vouchers to an additional 200,000 households. We also want to make sure that we provide significant investments to fund and preserve and operate public housing. We want to make sure that there's at least $3.6 billion for the HUD's homeless assistance grants program to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, and at least $300 million for a competitive tribal housing program targeted to tribes with the greatest needs, and at least $100 million for legal assistance to prevent evictions. So that's kind of like the update for the budget. And as we all know, last year we saw the Build Back Better Act passed in the House in November of 2021, and that called for $150 billion to address the country's growing affordable housing crisis. And since stalling in the Senate, President Biden and congressional Democrats are plotting a path forward to enact a significantly scaled down version of that bill. And so the president last week, I think it was last Friday, met with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the new Democrat coalition, offering new insights on how they can kind of restart those negotiations. But as those negotiations continue to develop, we encourage you all to continue to contact your members of Congress so that we can continue to make strong investments towards expanding housing vouchers to more than 300,000 households, and preserving public housing for its 2 million residents, and then $15 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund so that we can preserve, build, and operate more than 150 units of affordable housing. And Courtney will be dropping some links in the chat to kind of take action for those. We'll also provide like a fact sheet for you all that you can share with your members that dives a little bit deeper into why those important housing investments address inflation. So I'll take a little break, a little pause right there, but I'm going to see if there's any questions in the chat in regards to the policy updates. But if there's not, also welcome to everybody who just joined. I do see the question about closed captioning, and I should, let me see. Okay, I just tried to turn on the live closed captioning, so I believe whoever asked that question, just let me know if you can see it, and if you can't, we can try to troubleshoot that as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away. We have Elena, who's one of our policy analysts in the chat, who will be helping answer any of those questions. But if you have any questions afterwards, we can share the email address for our VP of Public Policy and Field, so you can follow up with any questions after the call. I think Leola had a question come in. Did you say that there will be funding for low-income new home buyers? Elena, if you wanted to jump in really quickly on that. Oh, so Elena just answered it, and she said the president's budget proposes $35 billion for mandatory funding for the new housing supply fund, and that fund that I mentioned earlier in the update, which support housing for renters and home buyers with low to moderate incomes. And yeah, thank you, Betty. I'm glad you can see the captions now. I'll make sure to put that in my notes for future reference to turn on a little bit earlier. Apologies, it wasn't on before. So I don't see any further questions in terms of policy. So do we know the requirements for the program in terms of the housing supply fund? I'm not sure there is any requirements just yet, just because there's not a lot of information as to how that money would be spent. Correct me if I'm wrong, Elena, but I think that hasn't really been developed yet, so we're still waiting for more information. And Elena just said that I'm right, so hopefully there'll be more information to share in the future, but thank you for asking that, Leola. I'll go ahead and move forward with our ERA update then if there's no further questions on policy, but just with ERA, we have 22.5 billion of ERA funds that have been dispersed to households for rent and utility assistance through the end of February. So this is about 58% of all funds available for rent and utility assistance. Over 4.6 million payments have been made, and approximately 3.2 million households have been served through that date as well. The payment number is different from households served because sometimes a household receives more than one payment. And by the end of February, 5 state programs and 40% of local programs reported spending all of their ERA1 funding. These programs could get additional funds from Treasury, but we honestly won't know if they received additional funding until late spring. And I know that there's probably some programs closing across the country. If you want to know more about which programs are still accepting applications, you can check out our ERA dashboard, which Courtney will drop a link to in the chat. And if you're also interested in learning more about the numbers that I just talked about and just like ERA trends in general, Courtney will also drop a link to that in the chat. And then we have a question from Betty in the Q&A box, just asking, is this included for public housing? And I'm not sure. I guess it like depends on the jurisdiction, but I don't believe so. I know that I've heard some folks in New York saying that they weren't receiving help from ERA because they were already receiving subsidies, but I don't know if that applies to all jurisdictions. I see Courtney. Oh, I thought you were typing the question, Courtney. I'm so sorry. But that seems to be the case. I don't know, Elena, if you would have more context on that.
Not really at this time. I can look into it, but I would agree. Just echo what you said.
Okay, that sounds. Thank you. And if you all have any further questions in regard to ERA2, we're going to share one of our research specialists' email in the chat, and I think Courtney just dropped it in there. Sophie will be your go-to person for any ERA questions. But again, thank you all for listening and for having some questions. I do see, let me make sure that I have everybody. There's 2 folks who have their hands raised. I'll go ahead and invite you into the room so that you can talk, and I'll start with Arturo. Arturo, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you should be able to.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I guess I missed out on the, someone having a problem with my system here, but a couple of I had a situation with a tax credit housing that I applied for, and it's in an upper scale community in Davis, close to Sacramento. It's and I felt that I was discriminated against because of they just pushed my file to the side. They said, "Oh, it looks like we can get you approved." I have like 700 credit score back then, and 733 or something. And then they pushed my file to the side. I paid a $600 deposit, and then it went on. I went back again, the same problem. Oh, we're working out, but you know, we have so many files here. We couldn't get to yours right away. And it's been like 6 months later, and I still have my money there. And I don't know who do I talk to about this, because I felt that because I'm low income, I have a family, and then maybe, I don't know, because I'm not saying that it could be because I'm Latino or not, but they just dropped me like nothing, and that the unit was available, and I was the first one that was there. So I want to know if there's anybody I could talk to about that. It's a tax credit housing situation.
Yeah, that's like a really good question too, and I know that discrimination is like a really big thing, I feel like, with housing in a lot of places, and I can definitely follow up with you and provide more information outside of this meeting. I wouldn't be able to like pull that up right away, but I'm definitely happy to help out afterwards and see.
Yeah, because I worked so hard to find, I'm sorry, I worked so hard to find a unit, and then I found I was the first one there. I mean, I just jetted over there, and I don't know if it's because of the community or what's going on or what, but I felt really wrong. I still have the deposit there. It's been months, and I came there 3 times. Said, "Oh, we're going to work on it. We're going to work on it." And then nothing. And they pushed me to the side. It was like, it was so disrespectful the way they treated me, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. Thank you for sharing your experience, Arturo.
Welcome.
Is the email that you put in your registration okay to follow up with you?
Yes, yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course. So for the sake of time, I know I have a few hands raised, and I'll definitely follow up. I know that Bill just posted a question in the chat, and Courtney answered it, so thank you a lot, Courtney, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward just for the sake of time, so we can cover some of the topics that we had lined up for today. But please feel free to reach out to me afterwards with any questions that you have, and I'll definitely get to them, and feel free to drop them in the Q&A section so we can get to them as well. But with that, I'm happy to introduce our guest for today. So today we'll be joined by Duaa-Rahemaah Williams, who's a state organizer for the Resident Action Project and the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And we also have Kelly Olson, who's a policy manager for Civil Survival, but they're both members of the Washington State Housing Justice Coalition. And we'll also be joined by Margaretta Lin, who's the executive director of the Just Cities Institute. And so with that, Kelly and Duaa-Rahemaah, I'll let you begin and share your experience with the Washington State Housing Justice Coalition.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here. Duaa-Rahemaah, do you want to say hello really quick? Or?
Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum, everyone, or evening, or wherever you may be.
Great. So I'm gonna start off first. So again, as was mentioned, my name is Kelly Olson. I'm the policy manager at the Civil Survival Project. I'm also formerly incarcerated, and so working on housing justice is something that's very personal to me, and somebody who's experienced just a tremendous amount of housing discrimination. And really, housing is probably one of the main foundations to successfully moving on with your life and kind of becoming re-entering into society. So I thought I'd give just a little bit of history on our coalition and the work that we've been doing in Washington. Several years ago, the city of Seattle passed the Seattle Fair Housing Ordinance, which was and is one of the most progressive pieces of legislation in the country. And so I was not part of the city of Seattle's process. And I joined the Housing Justice Coalition about 18 months ago to work on kind of modeling a statewide bill that would be modeled after what the city of Seattle did. Just to give a little more backstory, it was initially introduced as a statewide bill about 4 years ago, and it had a pretty disastrous first hearing in the Senate and didn't go any further than that. One of the things that happened when it had its policy hearing was it managed to coincide with the same day as the Landlord Lobby Day. And this was all pre-COVID. So numbers wise, we were outnumbered by landlords. I don't know how many, but it filled the room. And it was a really unpleasant hearing and really did not go any further after that. One of the problems that happens when doing this work is often the opposition, the landlords, anybody who's against our bill usually will come in with really horrible stories that is really just a small example of somebody with a criminal history. You know, they'll raise up somebody who's the absolute worst example. You know, Washington has had a number of some of the most famous serial killers in our country, and those are always the names that get brought up. But most people are people like me, other people who have made mistakes in their lives and are trying to move on with their life. So I was not part of the Housing Justice Coalition at that point. They took a year off, and then I joined about, like I said, about 18 months ago. And so we spent the last year really working on what does this policy look like, engaging with people who have lived experience, and trying to get ready to for another hearing in the 2022 legislative session. It definitely takes a lot of coalition building, and I think that, and Duaa-Rahemaah is going to talk a little bit more about the importance of coalition building. And I'll give a little bit of a spoiler. Our bill did not pass in the 2022 session, and so we're sad about that. However, we learned a lot, and I think that you know, a big part of where we were challenged and where we have a lot of areas of growth for is that we had struggled a little bit on coming to some consensus of what was the policy that we wanted, what was the policy that is realistic to actually pass given the, you know, political climate, you know, what is a political reality of passing a bill? Do we have enough grassroots organizing to pass what we want? The Seattle bill doesn't allow discrimination for anything, and either did ours, with the exception of for the public housing authorities. There's the HUD guidelines. So any of the crimes outlined in there, which is really just is somebody who's on the lifetime registry for a sex offense, as well as manufacturing meth while in public housing. And so our statewide one was modeled after that same one. The only time that somebody would be able to be discriminated against would be if the landlord it would only apply to if somebody was on the registry for a sex offense, and the landlord would have the burden of proof was on the landlord to be able to prove a non-discriminatory, legitimate business reason to not rent to this person. We also had an exception in there for anybody whose crime occurred under the age of 25, that regardless of what type of crime they committed, they could not be used against them. And I think that Duaa-Rahemaah and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. We work together on different things, but I want to give you a chance to kind of weigh in a little bit, and then I can fill in too. But we have a lot of organizing that we still need to do within the coalition.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Sid, for having me on here, and thanks for everybody that showed up. So I'm Duaa-Rahemaah Williams, and I'm a statewide organizer for the Resident Action Project, which is a program out of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And RAP is what we call ourselves, is a statewide network in Washington led by people who live in low income housing, have experienced housing injustice, homelessness, and such, and nonprofit and direct service staff. And we use our voice to build power to change local and state policy through storytelling, organizing, and civic engagement. And so I'm here. And how I got involved into the coalition, I was in and out of it, and I would come in, I would come out, but I also seen there was not a lot of people, you know, that looked like me on there or experience. And I'm also a person impacted by mass incarceration and a family member impacted by mass incarceration, that we didn't have family members on there talking about it, or enough other folks, enough people with lived experience. And I really value the voice of those with lived experience, you know, making them the center. So I'm gonna tell you my story of why I really got involved. So have you ever experienced housing injustice or homelessness as a result of the color of your skin, how much money you have, who you love, or you or your family member have a criminal background? And on top of all that hardship, we all know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color renters are dealing with. We are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated at a higher rate than whites, and are more likely denied housing due to our criminal background. So I relocated to Spokane in September 2016 because my husband was in prison and I had a son in prison too, and they were both in Eastern Washington. So I moved over here. And then when my husband was released in May 4th of 2020, you know, he stayed in transitional house for the first 3 months. But then we were talking to the apartment that I was staying in at the time about him moving in, and we was told that he was going to get an automatic denial due to his records. So and that was due to incidents that happened in 1994 when my husband was a juvenile. So being part of a coalition that was talking about House Injustice Act, that House Injustice Act was important to me to be part of that, and to bring other people with lived experience of being discriminated because of their background, or family members not be able to live together, husbands and wife, kids, you not be able to live with their mother or their father, and that families being separated. We need to have more voices on here to really tell our stories of how it's impacting us as a family, as a community, you know. So yes, it didn't pass this year, but we are organizing now to get people to come and really come strong with their voices, and let the legislative know how important this House Injustice Act is, and how important it is for housing, for us to be housed with our loved ones and our families. We'll turn it back to you, Kelly.
Great, thanks, Duaa-Rahemaah. Yeah, I will say one of the things that was important to us as a coalition is we really didn't want to have any like carve outs based on types of crime. We don't like to see a hierarchy of types of crime. It just adds to the racial disproportionality. And so that was one thing that the coalition wanted to stand on, is we didn't want to have housing for some people and not housing for others. And so, I think that, as Duaa-Rahemaah mentioned, we have a lot of work to do during the interim. Not only do we want to do the work as far as educating our community and getting allies involved, we definitely want to center lived experience, but we're going to need the allies supporting this work as well. This is an election year in our state. We want to make this an election issue, hold some, candidate forums, and really getting people involved in the process. We do have our original prime sponsor of the bill is actually formerly incarcerated herself, one of the first formerly incarcerated state legislators ever elected into state office. So we have some strong champions in our state, but we definitely still have a lot of work in front of us. And I see something in the chat. How can everybody support us? Well, stay
I
tuned.
can tell you how. Look, like Kelly said, this is a election year for us. And so as of 2022, anybody who was coming out of the doors, anybody who's been out the doors are eligible to vote. So not only are we holding candidate forums, we're going to be doing civic engagement, signing people up to vote, educating them about voting, and also making sure they vote. So we'll probably be doing a lot of phone banking. And the good thing about phone banking, you can phone bank from anywhere, right? Even if we're not in the same time zone, you can phone bank from anywhere. So we might need your support on that, helping us phone bank across the state of Washington to get the word out of how important it is to pass this bill and getting people to vote and registering.
Yeah, and just to, and we actually passed a bill last year. It used to be people who were on community custody or probation or parole were not allowed to vote. But we passed that bill last year. Now anybody who's outside prison walls is eligible to vote as soon as they're released and they register. And to Leola's question, the bill did not pass. So that's why we're kind of going back to getting more grassroots, getting more people involved, and being ready a little earlier. We didn't actually have our policy ready to be introduced to the legislature until about right before the legislature started. So we didn't have a lot of communications materials ready. We didn't have the opportunity to get people out there in front of it, telling their stories, which is really the biggest piece to, kind of change the hearts and minds of some people.
Well, thank you both, Kelly and Duaa-Rahemaah. I did have some questions myself, and I think something just came in through the chat. Claudia Swanee is asking if you had the bill number, and I think I'll go ahead and type that out, but I do believe it's HB 2017. Would it change year to year?
It would have to, our legislature operates on a biennium, and so 2023 will be the beginning of a new biennium, so it would have a new bill number in 2023.
Okay, so the number that it is now wouldn't be this. That's good to know. Thank you. Let me see if there's anything else that I missed in the chat, but I think, oh, you got lots of hearts. So we are going back to the drawing board. Got the name of the bill. We have Peggy who dropped like the actual legislation in the chat, so I appreciate that, Peggy. Peggy has also been working very closely with our advocates, so
Peggy's been a huge help.
Awesome people. I did have a question too for you all, and I know that you kind of just talked a little bit about how the bill didn't pass, but through that experience, like you talked about what you learned, but also how did you keep the advocates motivated and validated through their experiences when it didn't pass?
That's a tough one. You know, I
It is.
think that, you know, I'm actually looking at Duaa-Rahemaah because her husband joined us on our first coalition meeting after we knew it was not going to go any further, and just gave a really great motivational speech how he was affected by a particular law. He's out now because of a law that passed that took several years. And, you know, just having him being able to share that story was so powerful, because he's, you know, living proof that if we stay and we continue to fight, you know, and it was a several year process from, you know, when this particular bill passed to even the process of him getting out of prison. So I think for me, that was a really powerful story to have. Our first group back was, you know, here's a, you know, he's an amazing community leader and speaker, and one of my heroes. And so just having him being able to share that and kind of remind people, you know, as frustrating as this whole process is, that most of these big bills take a couple of years at least. You know, you start off with kind of educating and starting the conversation, and just continuing to move forward and get people going, kind of like a snowball. It's got to get bigger and bigger. So Duaa-Rahemaah, do you want to add on to that?
No, you did great. So for me, with the Resident Action Project, which me and Silver Survivor are going to get a little bit more closer during this season, so we can really talk, because I also have people, like I said, with lived experience of housing and with criminal backgrounds. And so just getting more people involved in that who really want to use their voice on that, and finding other people to use their voice with organizing, which we're going to really be doing, is building a base specifically for this bill. Because we have way too many people that are being denied housing already, and to add another factor, and as someone says, if they're denied housing, they're also denied, you know, getting employment and everything else. So it's just like a domino effect. So they already banned, you know, like banned the box for this, you know, for checking the box for employment. So we need to also do that for housing as well.
And I appreciate you both kind of bringing up the point that lived experience is such an important part of like this policy building and also coalition building. And for folks who aren't in Washington State or in California, what can they do to kind of get involved if they have lived experience like in their communities?
Go to them, ask them questions, invite them to the table. You know, help them help them have you write, have them help you write policies and stuff like that, because you know, we all know that those closest to the problem are always closest to the solution, and always further away from the decision-making tables and resources. And we really got to stop doing that, because we really do need to, I know all of us are non-chapter. There's one here in Spokane too. We really do need to listen to and center the voice of those with lived experience, because they have lived experience. That's the key word. Like, we have experience, professional experience. They have lived experience. It's the same concept, but they've been closer to the situation than those who are just with experience, because that's, you know, through work and through school and stuff like that, but not actually boots on the ground.
Yeah.
So they would probably have a PhD, you know, equivalent to a PhD because of their lived experience.
I would even argue that probably more than a PhD.
Right, and if you do go and reach out to people with lived experience, compensate them for their time, for their trauma that they have to relive, and for their experience and their voice. We can go, you know, pay professionals thousands of dollars. So we need to also look out for people with lived experience and make sure they're compensated.
Yes, 100%. I definitely do agree with that. Hold on, I'm just making sure that I'm not missing anything in the chat and the questions as well. I know that Margaretta also mentioned the All of Us or None chapter. I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna look into that now afterwards just to learn more about that. But I guess that's a really good transition to introduce Margaretta Lin, who's the Executive Director of Just Cities. But I want to thank Kelly and Duaa-Rahemaah for your thoughts and for sharing your strategies, and I really appreciate it. And Margaretta, you can go ahead and take it away.
Great. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you all, and such a fan of the work of the NLIHC, and just so inspired by what's happening in Washington State. Thank you so much. I'm here as one of the many members who worked on the design, enactment, and implementation of the fair chance housing laws that recently passed in Berkeley and Oakland, California. I'm also a family member of formerly incarcerated folks. So while I don't have personal lived experience, also a member of the community who's been directly impacted by mass incarceration in our country. The work that we do, I just want to acknowledge, because we're part of a bigger national movement and global movement in many ways. We stand on the shoulders of the folks of All of Us or None. They're a national organization based in Oakland, led by formerly incarcerated folks, and they were the ones who've been leading the charge on the ban the box and employment policies around the country. And they have chapters in different parts of the country, including in different parts of Wisconsin, Georgia, and other places. And please check out their website for more information. So Just Cities, we facilitate the work of a coalition called the Alameda County Fair Chance Housing Coalition that includes members of All of Us or None, Asian Prisoner Support Committee, Courage, which stands for Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, and many other organizations, including Sierra Club and the Tech Equity Collaborative. And our work in Oakland and Berkeley built on what happened in the city of Seattle, and before Seattle, what happened in the city of Richmond, California, with the development of their fair chance housing law. And we were able to work with the folks in Richmond directly and learned so much from the folks in Seattle. And so because we came after Seattle and had the benefit of their lessons learned, we were actually able to make some improvements from the Seattle ordinance. So what happened in Oakland and Berkeley, and why do we call those laws National North Star policies? Because there are so many fair chance housing laws in different parts of the country now. But only 3 of the fair chance housing laws have been enacted, actually really restore people's human rights and dignity, because it removes the consideration of criminal records from the entire housing application process. So you're not facing having to do a criminal background check towards the end of application process. Most of the fair chance housing laws that have been enacted, including in San Francisco and in Detroit and Chicago and Richmond, still requires a background check at some point in the process. So the laws that have been passed in Seattle, Oakland, and Berkeley really enable people to be judged on the merits of who they are today. And in fact, in our implementation work, and also we're creating an impact evaluation study of the Oakland and Berkeley laws have been enacted. We found that 33% of people who were surveyed have been able to find housing on their own or being able to live with a family member as a direct result of these new laws. And that is happening during this pandemic season. So we know it works when you give people a chance to be judged solely on the merits of who they are today. So what are some reflections of this work that we've been able to do? One, as Duaa-Rahemaah said very poignantly, it's so important to center the leadership of people with lived experience and also pay them for their labor, right? And so our coalition has what's called the Policy and Outreach Leaders Program, where we do leadership development, including around policy research for folks who are formerly incarcerated and family members. So they are really at the table and driving the conversations around the policy details, being part of the political sausage making process, and are also part of the implementation work itself. Number two, we have these uncommon coalition allies. So it's not just the folks, the reentry justice organizations, but we were able to bring Sierra Club and the power of Sierra Club to the coalition and had to actually go through a national coalition review process by the National Sierra Club. We have folks who are part of the Tech Equity Collaborative who also joined the coalition. And the last thing I would say is regarding our efforts on a statewide bill, we decided as a coalition to wait to pursue statewide legislation because we wanted to make sure that what got enacted statewide did justice to the movement work, right? That whichever state goes first as the statewide fair chance housing law should be the North Star and not a watered down version. We had a number of different state politicians contacting us. They wanted to sponsor something, but it was weak legislation, and we actually have opposed those efforts, including something that is going through the state legislative process right now. So from our perspective, strategically, we need to see similar fair chance housing laws passed in different parts of California to have the political power, the juice we need for the right kind of law statewide. And we're working with groups in LA and Riverside on those efforts right now.
Those are really exciting updates, Margaretta. Thank you so much for providing that perspective. I did see 2 questions come into the chat, and I'll continue to invite folks to share some of their questions, but I'll go ahead and ask what we have so far. The first one came from Yahemi in Utah, just asking if like how folks can get involved with the All of Us or None campaign, or I think it's like a program. I'm not really sure, but I think folks are really eager to get involved.
So you can go to their website, All of Us or None. I don't have the URL in my head, but if you Google All of Us or None, you should be able to find it. And I think there's information about joining one of their chapters.
Okay. Sounds good. And I'll look it up too and make sure that it's included in the follow-up email so people know how to get involved in the follow-up email. But if I have time to find it, I'll put it in the chat too.
And I see a question from Amanda in New York City. And if I may, Sydney,
Yeah.
Amanda, there's actually a coalition in New York City that includes John Jay College. And they had reached out to us because they've been working on a fair chance housing law for New York City as well. And happy, if you want to email me, I'm happy to connect you with them. And actually, Courtney, I think that's a different organization. So it's Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, All of Us or None.
We can definitely check afterwards too. We'll double check too. And I'll be sharing like everyone's email address afterwards too, so we'll have that for you all to follow up with afterwards if you have like additional questions as well, or if you need to follow up on like the information that's being shared. I see Jennifer had a question in the Q&A box.
Yep.
I think you kind of already addressed this in your comments, Margaretta, but I just wanted to make sure that it was answered. Just any updates on limiting look back periods for background checks? And then Jennifer follows up just saying, once someone served their sentence, that should be the end of it. They should not be denied a decent place to live.
That's right. So a lot of the laws that have been passed still have a look back period, right? There's still some condition. It's not totally, doesn't eliminate one's criminal background from consideration. So again, there's only been 3 laws that have been passed in the entire country that does eliminate the, there's no look back period in Oakland and Berkeley and Seattle, because landlords are not allowed to conduct a criminal background check, period. So it doesn't even apply. But that's not the case for a lot of the other laws that have been passed in different parts of the country.
I know I have.
I would just want to, what that came up a lot in our bill too, and one of our arguing points back on that is that, somebody already goes before a judge and goes through the whole criminal legal system and is judged at that point. And by the time they're out, they've served their sentence. And so we shouldn't be having people essentially going before a judge and jury every time they want to find housing or get a job or anything like that, that there is a criminal legal system that is taking into consideration the severity of the crime, their past history, all these kind of things have come into a decision that this person has been deemed safe to be in the outside. And so that was one of our arguments back against a look back period, is that we have criminal legal system that is judging people on that, and it's not up to landlords and other people.
I agree, and thank you for sharing that context, Kelly. We had another question come in from Regina. I believe Regina asked it in the chat as well, just asking if there's a fair chance law in Ohio. I don't believe there is, but any knowledge on how to get started with that work would be super helpful as well, I'm sure. If there's no feedback on that one, I'll go ahead and close that one out. But I guess one of the follow-up questions I had too is, how did you all, and this can be a question for everyone too, how did you adapt like your coalition building skills in the virtual era? And I guess like now that we're kind of going into the hybrid era too, it feels like people are kind of adapting.
Yeah, it's really hard, Sydney, and we were fortunate because our coalition was formed before COVID, and we got both the Oakland and Berkeley laws passed right before shelter in place occurred in California. But as part of that coalition building, we had face-to-face meetings with different organizations. We organized town hall forums. There's a lot of in-person work. We're currently working right now on an effort to get fair chance housing passed in Alameda County. And so we are doing virtual meetings with different organizations and their members. And so that is possible, but it definitely makes the work so much harder.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks like in our coalition would also agree, especially like at the national level. There have been like some bumps along the road. I feel like, Kelly, I know I saw you come onto the camera, so I want to give you a chance to speak.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that there is both some pros and cons. So because we were doing a statewide campaign, and you know, as an example, Duaa-Rahemaah is on we call it the other side of the state because you have to cross the mountains to get to where she is. And so it's a, you know, 4 or 5 hour drive, even from where I live up to Seattle, which is kind of the main city, you know, it's an hour and a half. So I think there are some pros that allowed us to bring in voices from, you know, a lot of different areas around the state versus just those who could get to someplace. You know, I do miss the in-person and, you know, being able to lobby at the Capitol in person, and doing some rallying around the state on an in-person level, but it also did bring in other voices that might not have been able to participate. And I see Duaa-Rahemaah came in there too.
Yeah, for me, I need the in-person, so being on Zoom is really hard because I like to build relationships, and it's easier to build relationships in person. So when I'm calling, you know, members just to check on them, I'm picking up the phone. It's like we don't need to meet by, you know, asking them actually how they're doing, because it's all about the relationships and not everything being a transaction. So it's about relationships, and for me, this has been hard. but it's work, because like they said, you can reach a lot more people, but then the people you really need to meet might not doesn't always have the access to get on Zoom. So we're missing a lot of vital people out there because we're on Zoom a lot. So I'm getting ready to get back in person and start, you know, being able to go and meet with those who don't have access or can't get on the Zoom call because English is not their first language, and we might not always have an interpreter and stuff like that. So language justice is also, you know, can be an issue as well, because we can't reach everybody by Zoom with the different languages that are around, you know, the state here in Washington.
That's like a really good point to like stay aware of too. I think a lot of the folks that I've worked with, especially through Tenant Talk Live, and I've like had the fortunate to meet through this platform, have also said similar things. Our state partners have said similar things of like wanting to go back in person and have those in-person interactions, because they're like really helpful in making sure not only that we're like advocating, but also that we're like building relationships with one another, which really like strengthens not only the movement, but also just like like the power that we kind of hold together, I guess. I know we are getting close to the end of the hour, so I just want to make sure that I address everyone's questions, and if I don't get to them, I'm so sorry, but we'll make sure to follow up. We had 2 people who raised their hands in the back room, so I'll invite one person to come in, and so the other person that I can't allow to come in, I'll make sure to follow up with you as well. But Alexander, if you want to go ahead and unmute, you had a question. No. Okay, I'll go ahead and move to Anna Scott then, who also had their hand up. Anna, if you want to go ahead, you can go ahead and unmute now.
Yes. Hi. Well, my name is Anna Scott. I'm a registered nurse. I'm actually in Michigan. I'm part of MICA and our Coalition for Expanding Housing Access, as well as part-of-time-done.org, and Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, as well as the ANA of Michigan's Legislative Committee. So I've been on a lot of calls with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition because of my work. I'm an advocating member with lived experience. And I just wanted to say, I think that one positive of the Zoom atmosphere, yes, it's negative with the relationship, but I feel like the ability to like expand and across, like just looking at time done, like the whole entire nation so easily, as well as being able to just, I mean, you can switch from one meeting to another without drive time, so there's been some really great positives I've seen throughout this work myself to these Zoom meetings, and yes, phone calls are so much more personal than a text, but I think that is one positive thing that I've seen come out of that with all of the coalition organizations I've been part of, is the fact that the reach can be so wide. So, and I thank you guys for this. I look forward to upcoming events, but of course, yes, in-person events. Yeah, we all can't wait to be free, but there are positives. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And to everybody who I didn't get your questions, I'll promise I'll follow up, and we'll share a lot of the information that was shared here today with everyone in a follow-up email. And I know we're at time, so I just want to thank again Duaa-Rahemaah and Kelly and Margaretta for joining us today for Tenant Talk Live, and all of the attendees that were able to make it today and ask such thoughtful questions. As always, if you have any questions for me or any of our panelists, feel free to reach out to me, and I can make those connections for you. And don't forget to join our Facebook page, because that's how y'all get to talk to each other and ask each other questions. So feel free to join it if you haven't yet, and have a great night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.